I've seen in a lot of implementations of the Active Directory and Google Apps synchronization of passwords, there's a lot of confusion on how it works and why it doesn't work sometimes. So I thought I'd create a little presentation to help demonstrate that. So if we were an average user, we might use Password Station at SCCOE to go change our password. Maybe the current password is I hate my boss with an exclamation point, and they want to change it to I hate my job with an exclamation point. So they would go ahead and use Password Station. It would then update that password in Active Directory. Then there would be a trigger that would be kicked off on that domain controller, which would send that password over to Google. And now we have synchronized passwords. Perfect. That's the way it should work. Let's say they are visiting the help desk for the first time and they actually have the help desk person change their password for them in the Active Directory. Well, that's okay because it will then send that password, I hate my job, to Active Directory, which will also trigger a password to be sent to Google. So now we have synchronized passwords, I hate my job. Sometimes users think, well, I'm in Google. Why don't I just go ahead and log into Google and change my password? If they did that, and let's say their password was I hate my boss, and they want it to be I hate my job, they would be able to change it in Google, but there is no way for Google to communicate back to Active Directory, and they would end up with unsynced passwords. Normally, people that don't have admin privileges wouldn't be able to do this one. And that's why we block the ability to change passwords for the average user in Google. If the average user does go to try to change their password, they get sent right to Password Station. And that ensures the flow of the password reset. So what happens when things go wrong? And sometimes they do. Well, let's say that someone goes into the Password Station, resets their password, but it doesn't work. It doesn't change that password. One of the reasons is it could be that there's a linkage break between the two systems. Now, the linkage usually is the email address, right? Well, sometimes people's emails change. They might get married, or in our case, we actually have still quite a bit of emails that are still listed as the underscore as their email address. If Active Directory is having the underscore as their primary email address, yet Google has the first initial last name, there's not going to be a synchronization. Another thing that can go wrong is they change their password, but the trigger breaks. Now, how can the trigger break? Doesn't happen often. And as a matter of fact, the only reason that I can think of why the trigger would break is somebody spun up another domain controller and forgot to install the Gsuite password sync application on that domain controller. So randomly, they might be redirected to that domain controller during the password reset. And of course, their password doesn't get sent to Google. Now, what you could do whenever this break happens, you could say, hey, just go do it again. Don't do that. And the reason is because for whatever reason that it didn't work the first time, that could happen again. And you could be sending the end user in this endless loop of resetting their password. Instead, just go ahead and log into Google Admin, share your screen with that user, because then you could just click reset password and allow them to type in their own password into Google that's the same as their Active Directory. That way they don't have to reset their password. Hopefully, if everything syncs back up, then they won't have a problem next time they change. But after you've reset their password, it's time to do a little research. Why didn't the synchronization happen? It's probably going to be one of those two issues. One, the email address in Active Directory is not the same as the email address in Google. Or two, there is a domain controller that doesn't have that Google synchronization software installed on it.